Greetings, everybody. Good morning. My name is John Pills, and please let's have a welcome for Dr. Qassem Bayat. First, before we go through with the PowerPoint and the presentation regarding freedom and liberty, a perspective from the Baha'i Writings, we would like to first go over his quite beautiful biography. Dr. Qassem Bayat is a specialist in the exploration and production of oil and gas. This has led him to serve in many oil and gas producing provinces around the world. Over the past 45 years, he has authored many industrial and scientific articles in his areas of expertise: protection of the environment and prevention of pollution of our rivers, lakes, and oceans, land and air have been his major concern. He has fulfilled his obligation through responsible operation and by increasing awareness of the public, by speaking on many radio and TV stations, and delivering lectures at universities and other centers of learning over the past decades. Dr. Bayat has been a student of world religions and their respective scriptures, the history of nations and cultures, and in particular, the Baha'i Faith. He has authored many articles in Baha'i publications and regularly presents on Baha'i radio and TV programs. For 7 years, he presented the teachings of the Baha'i Faith as solutions to world challenges and religious issues. At a live televised interfaith dialogue at Iran program of Pars TV. Over the past 2 years, in another weekly TV program in the Court of History, he is presenting the Baha'i teachings as solutions to the past and present cultural and religious shortcomings of the Muslim world. Dr. Bayat and his wife, Dr. Sateh Bayat, live in Sugar Land, Texas. So now that we've gone over this beautiful biography of Dr. Bayat, we'd like to first and foremost introduce you to this very special person who has this PowerPoint and presentation on freedom and liberty, a perspective from the Baha'i Writings.
Greetings from Texas to all who attend this webinar, wherever you are. The technology is wonderful because the technology allows us to communicate with each other all across the world. The topic of my presentation today is freedom and liberty from the perspective of the Baha'i Writings. Of course, the subject of freedom and liberty instantly brings up varieties of thoughts and ideas to one's mind. And I would like to share a few of those with you before we get really into the heart of this presentation. Often the issue is the state of us where we are. And of course, the state of not being imprisoned or enslaved that comes to the mind immediately. Civil rights and liberties have always been very dear to us, so that also comes to mind when we talk about the subject. Economic freedom. Increasingly, as humanity, we are realizing that freedom isn't free, as we say, unless we have economic independence. The real idea is freedom is about freedom from want, fear, and discrimination. Academics, of course, think of scientific freedom and intellectual freedom to be able to present whatever they want. In the arena of religion and faith, when people speak of freedom, apart from freedom of worship, freedom of belief, they often are referring to free will, which is part of religious believers think that comes with the creation. So with that in mind, the presentation today that will take us to probably 2 and possibly 3 sessions will cover the concept of divine unity, also application of this concept of a mighty God and a mortal and weak man, which has been prevalent throughout the history. Then we are going to switch gear and talk about a new take on divine unity, which is really the Baha'i perspective on what that divine unity is all about. Because historically, divine unity has stayed in the realm of divinity schools, and divine is a being well into heaven, perhaps with little implications to us positively. Then we are going to be talking about love, which is the cause of creation and the source of freedom and liberty. In future sessions, if we don't get that far, we will be talking about the nature of creation and the uniqueness of the creation of human beings, to see exactly what is it about this creation that we are so excited about and we would like to talk about it. We will be talking about the reality of a human being that's made up of a body, its life force, and of course the spirit, which would be most of our emphasis in these 2 or 3 sessions. We will be talking about creation stories, as in the past people have talked about it, have written about it, and have believed in it. And then we will focus on the concept of creation as stated in the Baha'i Writings, and importantly, the implications of love, freedom, and liberty on things such as equality. And we will conclude that practically anything beautiful that we want in the world will be the implications of this freedom and love. Otherwise, we will have a world which is really not that beautiful. So I would like to start this presentation by saying that historically, at least amongst the believers of the Abrahamic religions, that is Judaism and Christianity and Islam, this notion of unity of God or divine unity has been pretty strong. And although Christianity apparently relates to 3 Godheads, God the Father, God the Son, and God the Holy Spirit, but at least the theologians of the Christian faith realize that still they're talking about divine unity. Basically, these 3 Godheads are one. And the fact that this belief has been presented in the form of Trinity, it's just a matter of history, the way it appeared. Otherwise, quite clearly, the divine unity is accepted. Around the world, people of very many different faiths, in different ways, pointing to different directions, using different names and affiliations to churches and mosques and synagogues and temples and so on, relate to this Godhead. And of course, they have their own perspective of it. What I would like to start to point out the root cause of the issues that culturally and also from a religious perspective we have in today's world is the fact that this concept that God is powerful and man relative to God is weak, it became a model that this model turned to a universal perspective on human society. And I'm going to show you some examples how such a theological concept as God, although we believe that he is unique and is this divine unity, how in some ways it's been harmful to human society, basically assuming a powerful almighty in heaven who is in control of all things, and mankind being sitting on earth with all of its divisions, with a beginning that is not that glamorous. This is the type of notions that mankind historically had, that this powerful and mighty God had all the force, all the power, all the abilities, and man was a mortal being, entirely dependent for everything on God. That's a concept which is the Lord of all creation, created quite a number of issues. That model of God being powerful and man being weak, used as a type model that then defined the relationship between strong man and a weaker man. And if you take that to its natural conclusion, for example, the way God overlords man, man is superior to women. And therefore, the gender inequality begins to take shape. We can find that even in our modern society today, that gender equality is not something that we can really be very proud of. We have all indications that no matter where in the world we go, with few minor exceptions, there is a glass ceiling for the progression of the female in society, whether it's in the world of sport, even in the Western world. You can see that division and equality. In the pay, of course, that's pretty obvious. I would like to take that farther and in a single slide show the harmful implications of this type of model. For example, the free man versus slave. Slaves have been told to be obedient to their masters by the same model. Similarly, a believer over a non-believer, let's say infidels, that's superiority. The problem of accepting superiority of whites over blacks throughout our history, that's another implication of that very same model. Or landowners versus peasants, which is a historical problem running for thousands of years. In fact, some of the earliest forms of organization and government that was created was a feudal land-owning society. And those who didn't own lands, they were peasants, and they were regarded as second-class citizens. Kings and rulers throughout the ages have used the same model, constantly pointing out to God's power and might over man, and seeing themselves of applying exactly the same model, basically kings and rulers, placing themselves in the position of God and the subjects being there. We can go on about this type of injustice in the world, which is entirely the result of this misunderstanding of the relationship of the Lord with his creations. All of these come as a result of not having love and compassion and equality within the human race. Wars have been fought on that lack of love and lack of understanding of compassion and equality. Struggles all around have been related to that. Religious bigotry is significant throughout human history, if you just think about it. The Christian faith that came for love, we will find that has been involved among some of the most bitter wars in the world, even passing the Crusades and the Spanish Inquisition and the atrocities between the Lutherans and the Catholics, and these atrocities extending to people of other faith across the world, and particularly finally resulting in the annihilation of 6 million Jews, followers of Moses. Apartheid was justified on that basis because they were told that they were less of a man relative to the whites in South Africa and many other places. Slavery has been, the reason for slavery has been, again, this sense of superiority. Sectarianism, we have it of all kinds across the world, and it recognizes no religion. All religions, all beliefs, one way or another, have been involved in that. The Crusades, over almost 200 years of wars and dying of countless hundreds of thousands of people, is a part of that. Colonialism came as a result of that. Anti-Semitism, which is even prevalent today, was the result of that. We can go on and on about this misunderstanding of a theological principle, which is the principle of God being powerful, and then applying it to man being weak and using that model to cause all those problems. Graphically, I would like to show you few of those. The landowners or their agents dictating what the peasants would do. It goes back to very ancient days, even from the Egyptian history. We have evidence of this kind of superiority of the Lord versus inferiority of man. The treatment of the blacks have been one of those unfortunate events in history that we have seen. Slavery, which was basically enslaving of Africans, certain tribes by other tribes, and then selling them to the trade machine of the West and taking them in thousands and thousands, practically millions of them, across the world to the New World. Not to mention that slavery in the Old World has also been going on. But the scale that it took in the course of development of the new continent of Americas, of course, is a record of atrocities by one race over the black race of Africa. some harmful forms of that, even today, we can see it at work, that those are that charged with responsibility over others could significantly undermine people that work with them. Now, having shared with you certain problems associated with that concept of God being mighty and powerful relative to man being weak, I mentioned earlier on that something was missing, a significant ingredient was missing, and also that was a misunderstanding of a model of creation. The Baha'i Faith starts with this form. In the Baha'i concept, the divine unity becomes a model for the unity within the creation. You can see that it is still theologically based. So this concept of oneness of mankind, which is significant, arrives here. Maybe before I continue on this, I can stop and answer any questions that my presentation so far has raised for the audience. I would like to hear the first question.
Mr. Bayat, we have asked people to write their questions to us, and we will post it to you into the chat toward the midway or toward the end, please.
Very good. Well, thank you very much.
Thank you.
Wanted to make sure that the audience know that this is interactive and they are prepared. I'm prepared to answer questions. But yes, of course, it's best if the questions are left for the last 10, 15 minutes of the presentation.
Yes, sir. Thank you.
Very good. Thank you. So we will continue with this. And as I mentioned, the Baha'i Faith takes a new take on this concept of divine unity. Yes, God is powerful, and there is this divine unity that had brought into being the creation. But the Baha'i Faith does not take divine unity only as a theological concept staying in heaven, but brings it down to earth, and by the same token, then states that mankind, which is the creation of the Lord, also contains this unity. In other words, we are all one. So the divine unity results in the unity of humankind. And in the course of this presentation, you will see that unity of humankind cannot be achieved unless there is equality and freedom amongst the humankind. And step by step, we will take these concepts further to see how divine unity basically results in all the desirable things that we would like to see in the world. The Baha'i Faith starts with what we said has been lacking in the theological concepts before, or at least amongst the ordinary people, and has been the cause of all those problems that I referred to. The Baha'i Faith clearly declares that it is out of his love for creation and for mankind that God has brought this creation into being. And in the course of questions and answers, I'll be happy to quote two passages from the writings of Baha'i Faith that emphasizes that. Therefore, to start with, we add a new ingredient to the creation, and that's basically God's love for man and his desire that mankind reciprocates this love. And the implications of this, of course, is phenomenal. So God created man out of his love. We can never fully appreciate the significance of this ingredient and what it's going to do to the human society. As I said before, the models that we were using was lacking that concept of love and unity and equality, and hence all problems associated with that. We would like to see what this love and unity is going to do in changing the world, and what are the other implications of this love of our Lord for this creation. So mankind has been created out of God's love for the humankind. And it doesn't end there, but God wants to be known by man. He states that I have created thee to know me. And that knowing is about reciprocating that God's love, and significant implications of that as we go through, we are going to talk about. First of all, as I hinted at this before, this God's love for man indicates the need for free will and freedom. And the reason for that, in a love relationship that now we stated governs the relationship of the Lord with his creation, which in the past was never the focus, in this love relationship, you cannot have it without the freedom on both sides. And God, we have always believed, that is capable of doing anything that God wishes. But what we haven't been certain about is whether mankind also has a free will. And now we believe mankind has a free will. In other words, it's been created with a free will. And later on, we will talk about the human spirit. And basically, this is the freedom that human spirit has. And this free will results in the concept of freedom in human society. So if we put it all together, with these few theological concepts, which is God created man, and God created man out of his love, and that necessitating freedom and liberty, and equality does not make sense unless freedom and equality exists. And the fact that when man is born in this world, is in need of training and education, and without God's regular and consistent guidance, mankind cannot reach a state where it can reciprocate freely and with love, the God's love and affection. We arrive at a society that looks very different. It's a society that we can say they're all citizens of one world. We can say it reaches a society that all the diversities of the human race just becomes the beauty of the garden of the human race, rather than distinguishes people from each other, accepting equality in gender, eliminations of all kinds of prejudices, being race, nationality, education, circumstances, status in society, height, and so on. All of these becomes secondary and not distinguishing features, and therefore we are going to end up with an equal society where all members have equal status in dignity, they have equal rights, they are endowed with a conscience and should act towards one another in a spirit of brotherhood. As I said, the significance of these concepts, theological concepts, and application of that to human society is pretty significant. Those who in the past have read about the Baha'i Faith and have talked to Baha'is would instantly hear Baha'is talk about principles such as equality of man and woman, avoidance of confrontation, cooperation versus competition, elimination of wars, elimination of prejudices, world citizenship, abandoning of wars and ideas of this kind. And look at it and they say, well, these are all to do with human society. Which part of it comes from religion? My attempt today was to say that all of these principles that often you hear it, Baha'is refer to, come from Baha'i theological perspective and directly from the theology of the Baha'i Writings. This is the type of dreams that mankind throughout the ages have been dreaming about. Martin Luther King, in his last sermon, I have a dream. That's the dream he's talking about. And of course, the Baha'i Faith goes way beyond whatever most of human thinkers have so far talked about. A unique aspect of the Baha'i Faith and its perspectives and its concepts of what's already been mentioned to you comes from the fact that we see a very unique aspect to human creation. While we fully recognize that this universe that we live in, probably based on some suggestions and strong indications of our scientists, has all come about as a result of a big bang in the universe, and there are other theories, and we leave this aspect of the physical creation of the world to the world of science, because this is the realm of science, and faith does not enter this realm. But if you take what our scientists say, some almost 14 or 15 billion years ago, something significant happened within our universe, and focused energy exploded, and eventually these rays of energy moved on, slowed down, converted to mass, and cosmic dust was created. And over billions of years, the cosmic dusts form galaxies and stars and their satellites and planets and so on. And our solar system being one of those, being created a long time ago, and our planet Earth being one of those created almost 5 billion years ago. So if we go with this idea that our world, which is the planet Earth, came about almost 5 or so billion years ago, we cannot find trace of human beings very much earlier than maybe 1,000,000 years. The Baha'i Faith still takes key from the science world that are talking about a phenomena of evolution processes, that when the first living cell was created throughout the ages, in hundreds of millions of years, that single cell multiplied and grew and developed to different forms of creation, different forms of living beings, from plants and animals and insects and birds. And particularly one of these happens to have formed our ancestors, human beings. So the idea that the faith interjects here is that within this evolutionary process, which we well recognize, there has been a design, a divine will to create this particular species, human beings, to become capable of receiving God's love and reciprocating it. Therefore, those who talk about intelligent design versus those who purely go on a basis of survival of the fittest and the competition theories of mutations and so on, we have no issues with any of those. We could see all those processes at work, but we believe that the formation of this particular species has required an intelligent design to bring him about. So in the process of that, we have the human beings coming alive. Therefore, the Baha'i Faith, when it talks about the creation of the human being, it does not start from where all it began, billions of years, but it starts from the time that this particular species has developed the brain size and ability to distinguish itself from the rest of the environment. And God has vouchsafed what is called spirit to this being. Therefore, when we talk about human beings, we do recognize that in the same way that a human fetus goes through steps in the womb from practically a fertilized egg to become a fully developed human fetus ready to be born, in the Baha'i writings there are references that the human beings have gone through the womb of history, the womb of earth, through phases after phases after phases until it appeared in the present form that we know it. Even there are jokingly references that at one time probably it had a tail. Therefore, the Baha'is think of a human being as essentially having three aspects to his existence. A body that we well recognize, that is the product of processes on earth that has brought it to this point in time. A life force that have grown with the evolution of this body. And this is exactly what, as human beings, we share with the rest of creation on earth, being plants or being animals. But a unique aspect we regard it as spirit. And the real difference between a human being and the rest of the species on earth has to do with this spirit and the purpose that it was created for. In the past, people believed that this spirit is within the body and believe that at the time of death, this spirit comes out and the body dies. Our belief is that this spirit is not inside the body because it's not material, it's unspiritual, and its only link to the human body is that of affection. In the Baha'i writings, there are references to this analogy of light shining in a mirror, and saying that as long as a mirror is capable of sustaining itself, and reflecting light can do that. But if that mirror breaks or is damaged, it would lose that ability. And therefore, using that analogy, the human body is governed by a spirit that uses the instrument of human brain to govern the activities of the human body. And as long as the human body is safe and sound, capable of functioning, and has not reached the end of its life because of old age or disease or accident, the spirit's affection to the human body will remain. And this is where the idea of creation from a Baha'i perspective begins, and I would like to spend a lot more time on spirit, what the Baha'i writings say about it, and how this spirit relates to that all-powerful Lord that created it, how that the spirit reciprocates God's love, and what will become of human spirit once the body, for any of the reasons that I mentioned, loses the ability to sustain its life force. And what would that spirit do following this? It's a very long subject, and I propose to use next session to get into the details of what that spirit is about, and also, important enough, what are the implications of that spirit? Because the material scientists of ours throughout the ages have never been able to arrive at the principle of equality of mankind, because they would always look at the product of human endeavor, and they would imagine it only materially. But from a Baha'i perspective, another element that significantly enforces the notion of equality is the fact that every human species, regardless of its status and conditions and so on, has this significant gift from the Lord, which is the Spirit. And when we talk about equality, we are basing it on the fact that we all share that significant gift. And therefore, it has nothing to do with our intellect, our ability to produce, the level of civilization we have created, and so on. As I said, it's a subject I would like to get into in the next session, and I have already spoken over half an hour, and I will be happy to answer questions. It would be very good if questions are read, so that I will do my best to answer them. If the questions pertain to what I've already said, I will do my best to answer them. If it relates to topics that I've just started, or the answers coming in the next session with a lot more detail, I would beg the indulgence of the questioner to wait until the next 1 or 2 sessions. So here I'm happy to answer questions.
Thank you, Dr. Bayat. So there are a few questions that are asked. The first question is from Mr. Mahmoudi. He's asking about brain death. You can tell me if this is relevant to this one or the next lecture. But if someone undergoes brain death, but their heart remains alive, has the soul left the body, or is it still there?
Very good. It's actually going to be answered a lot better after we talk about this spirit and we detail its relationship to human body. But the soul never leaves the body. The soul is not in the body in the first instance to leave it. And as long as that human body functions what normally supposed to do, that affection of the spirit with the body remains. But the subject of brain dead is something for our physicians to answer, and that is, do they ever think that that body is going to function at least with some degree of happiness in life, be conscious of the world, do things that has been created in the first place? If none of those things answer is yes, then probably that body, although mechanically can be retained here, but would not be in line with the spirit that human being was created. But the actual judgment on what should happen to that person is beyond my understanding, and probably next week when I explain a lot more about the spirit and its functions and the relationship to body and the purpose of it, I think any inquirer will make his or her own judgment on that.
So Irfan, if you would like to listen further, next week we're going to have further indulgence on that subject, and definitely we will be able to clarify a few more things next week. So if you can tune in next week, we'll get more answers to that question. Another question was from Miss Barbara Lading. Some people believe our individual spirit existed before we were born and made choices of when to come to earth, what parents to have, what mission the soul was going to work on in this earthly plane. Others believe that the soul was created at the moment of conception. Can these beliefs be reconciled?
Yes, I can talk about the Baha'i perspective on that subject. And again, next week, I will have a lot more to say about it, just because this friend asked about it, Irfan, at this time. The Baha'i Faith teaches that
Miss Barbara.
I'm sorry?
Miss Barbara Lading, yes.
Oh, Barbara, yes. The Baha'i Faith believes that the spirit for each human being is created as a unique spirit for that fertilized egg that in the womb of the mother is growing to become a human being. And that spirit is spiritually and emotionally and by the process of love is attached to that evolving, if you like, fetus. Therefore, we don't believe that the spirit for us is created before. By the same token, we don't believe in reincarnation, namely the spirits come back to this world in different forms and so on. These are subjects that I will be happy to cover next week.
All right. And now here's a question from Miss Jane Bahman. What is the relationship between the divine unity and human development?
Yes, thank you for that question. As I mentioned, God, of course, is independent of his creation. And divine being and the unity of divine being, at best, we will have some concepts and some ideas about it. But where we are with regards to our status, we would never be able to fathom the power or the wholeness of a being who has created all this universe and had set all these processes in motion. And in fact, many of our scientists also, after they study this universe, simple things such as a human gene, they come to the conclusion that these processes have a lot, some kind of influence outside the material world. That's why there are so many scientists that when they look at Darwinism and the idea of the evolution by one becoming superior to the other and surviving and the others don't, when they look at the diversity and the intricacy of the design of any being, just a single butterfly that is produced with so much beauty, they have to say that there is some kind of power in this. At the time of Abdu'l-Baha, for the information of the friends, Abdu'l-Baha was the son of Baha'u'llah, the founder of the Baha'i Faith. And he went into prison with his father at the age of 9. And when he left prison, he was over 70 years old. And he was left out of prison only when the Ottoman Empire collapsed, because he was a prisoner of the Ottomans. He traveled to the West, Americas and Canada, coast to coast, and Europe. When he was in France, one of the significant scientists of the age and philosophers of the age, who was a tally of Einstein, his name is Henry. I remember his name shortly for you. Mm-hmm. Yes, he, because of his students, and few of them were Persians in Paris, would go to see Abdu'l-Baha. And he would ask Abdu'l-Baha quite clearly, why do I need God to imagine the creation? And Abdu'l-Baha asks for a glass of water. And there were others present, and the notes of that meeting is written down by one of the students in that particular occasion. And Abdu'l-Baha looks at that glass of water and says, if this glass of water comes from the sea, could this water have qualities that the sea does not have? And this gentleman says, no. Abdu'l-Baha then says, how could the nature itself create something which is different than itself, namely having a free will, as you did by coming here on your own free will? And of course, this gentleman immediately recognized the position, and Abdu'l-Baha referred to free will being something that doesn't exist in nature. Every aspect of nature is bound within certain laws. How could this nature create a human being who has a free will? So the concept of divine being to us is that force and power that we cannot describe, and yet we can see its creation. And the only link that we see with him is through his efforts to educate us, to culture us, to refine us, to civilize us, through these messengers that have come throughout the whole human history to every part of the world. So the only thing that we know about him is through the words that have come down. And as I said, the latest of these are the words of Baha'u'llah. So that's how we think about that divine being. Beyond that, whatever we imagine will be our own imaginations. And certainly for one, I will not be able to offer anything beyond what I've just said. Thank you.
So, thank you. We have another question for you. Actually, based off of, this is my own, based off of the last presentation we had, which what you've just mentioned, I've found a link between the last presentation and this one. I want to ask you, this force that you say that it seems to, as you very adequately described, be the inspiration for creation with regards to the genes that you see, the genomes of the beings that have been created from that. Do you see some transmaterial force at play that's causing this creation in your own perspective? Like this expression of a creator.
Yes. The interesting part is to just look at ourselves as human species and see how much we have changed over the past 100 years, 200 years, 500 years, 2,000 years, 5,000 years, in terms of our understanding, our knowledge, our ability to comprehend. Therefore, we are simply looking at a situation that our comprehension from such a mighty force and power will always be faulty. And when we go through the scriptures and put them all in front of you, from some of the most ancient scriptures until the Baha'i scriptures, you definitely see a progression. It grades, moves forward, constantly demands more, and expects a greater and greater level of understanding. So the infusion of revelations that come to human race not only provides a greater level of understanding to the human race, but also educates human race to a higher and higher level of understanding. And therefore, if you want to go back and look at, for example, the story of creation as it appears in the Genesis, in the book of Genesis, and ask ourselves, is that how the creation happened? The answer obviously will be no. And you heard me today talking about very different creation process. So we ask ourselves, so what is the problem? The problem is our understanding. I can just jokingly tell you that when my two sons were young, they were 4 and 6 years of age, one Sunday they were playing in the garden. They ran in and we were watching them from the window. We lived in Scotland at the time. And they ran in, and my older son, 6 years of age, turns around and said, "Daddy, Mommy, where do we come from?" So obviously, it's something they'd heard at school. And we had no idea what to say to them at that age that would satisfy their curiosity. And because in those days, the idea was that Stokes bring children to the homes, we said, well, look at that beautiful rose bush in the garden. They looked at it and said, well, we found you there. Now, considering that my son is now MD, PhD, and a scientist in genomics, he often jokes with me about the subject. So you can see God can only say to us according to our capacity. And as this capacity grows, we are going to learn greater and greater degrees about his love, about his attributes. So for the time being, divine being to a Baha'i consists of attributes, names and attributes that have been manifested by his divine teachers that he sent us, the messengers. Love, compassion, caring, sharing, and so on. And these are attributes that we associate to that creator. And that's what I said. Mankind has reached a position that now for the first time, we can talk about that extra ingredient of love and compassion in the creation, and suddenly we end up with very different conclusions that are than our friends 2,000 or 3,000 years ago reading Genesis have arrived at. Thank you.
Beautiful. I want to ask on that, and there are 2 questions in the queue. So I want to ask on that, this item regarding the progress of humanity until now. Is it written that the spiritual being of man, or the physical ape-descended body of man, was determined to come into being? What I mean to ask is it being said that the specific evolutionary path that led to humanity was planned? Or is it more that the souls would find themselves in whichever intelligent species would have emerged?
Again, part of this question is for our scientists to answer, and that is whether the brain of a human being today is the same as the brain of a human being 2,000 or 3,000 years ago. Are we evolving as a species, and our brain developing greater and greater capacity for learning? So that's one aspect. I would leave that to our scientists, but I venture to say that yes, as our physical body is evolving, our brain is also changing. And our brain basically being our capacity to rationalize things, okay? And we are changing as human beings. Today, humanity is much taller than it used to be 500 years ago or 1,000 years ago. Every year we run faster, we swim more, we run longer distance. So even physically speaking, that's why all these Olympic records are broken every year, because physically we are doing better and better. And not all of it is because of the technology we are using. Some of it is just because physically we are becoming fitter and stronger as a species. But spiritually as well is the same. That is, as time goes on and our brain capacities increases and is capable of doing more and more things, and we are changing society and bringing things that are becoming norm that wasn't the norm before, naturally our spirit starts with something extra. In fact, as I said before, in the Genesis story of creation, Earth or life on Earth is basically a prison, and Adam and Eve come here with a prison sentence. Eve to suffer pangs of birth, and Adam to suffer hard work because they have had a bite of an apple or something to that effect. In the Baha'i perspective, this life is a school, that our spirit is born in this school to acquire virtues, human virtues, that are all experiential, such as love and compassion, sharing and caring, honesty, truthfulness, fidelity, and many things like that. And none of it can be read and learned from books. They're all experiential virtues. Therefore, God wants us to take this world and make it better and better as a school. That's why we want to put an end to wars. That's why we want to bring equality everywhere. That's why we want to create democracy, that I will talk about it as a byproduct of that love and equality and so on. So we want to make this school better and better every day. And when our spirit comes with a newborn into this world, that newborn is growing up in a school with a lot more sciences and technology than before, and a lot of more refined virtues than before. And at the end of the day, the purpose of this whole process is that these human souls, these spirits, acquire these great virtues in this school of life and carry with them to the Lord. Because just like parents educate these children to become great companions for them later, the Lord created us for his companionship. And when, in a sort of very briefly, I said we need to reciprocate God's love, that was really the intention, that we go to him with far better qualities than in the past we've had. Thank you.
Thank you for that. There's one last question, and I think a very, very important last question. Is poverty a barrier to equality, justice, and equity?
Absolutely it is. And it's part of my presentation next week because, as I said, this Baha'i concept of creation with the ingredient of love and free will demands so many things that equality is part of it. In fact, we cannot even have democracy without it. And these are things that I will tend to cover them thoroughly and show the links of them, perhaps more than I can answer in a quick question. But it's a great question, and it's part of what I'm going to talk about next week and the week beyond.
Thank you, Dr. Bayat. You have been an amazing speaker today. We appreciate you joining us. And I just want to say for everyone who is listening that we will be continuing this presentation next week. There will be a part 2 to this presentation where Dr. Bayat will answer the questions, and we will be starting at 10:45 a.m. next week on Sunday, 10:45 a.m. Eastern Standard Time. And again, please download the link so you have it as a quick link on your screen. You can just click in and join. You can join by telephone, and most of all, in the chat box that's available to you, you can ask your questions. Dr. Bayat, thank you so much for joining us. One last thing, you can send us questions through our website, clearwaterbaha'is.org, or on Facebook, the Clearwater Baha'i Center Facebook page. Thank you very much, Dr. Bayat. We hope that you have a very beautiful program that's starting up next. And if anyone's interested, Dr. Bayat is a speaker on Pars TV on a television series, as I had described prior in his biography. Thank you so much, Dr. Bayat.
Thank you very much. Again, thank you for you who organized this presentation and directed it. Thank you for the audience. And at the end of these 2 or 3 presentations, I will send a paper based on everything that I've said so that the friends would have a lot more detail of what I've said with references that they can go and check out for themselves. Thank you and have a great weekend.